Welcome to the Good Health Podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Good, a certified functional medicine practitioner, registered nutritionist, and author. In this podcast, we delve into the world of energy and immune health and wellness with positivity, from optimal health and energy to stress and burnout, right through to immune conditions such as thyroid and autoimmune disease. We deep dive into functional medicine, nutritional medicine, and lifestyle medicine, as well as the personal stories of our amazing guests, from Olympians to famous faces and guest experts from all different parts of the health and wellness world. It's time to stop letting your health hold you back and become the optimal version of you. Don't forget to come and join the conversation on Instagram at good_health, that's GOODE, or visit the website nicolegoodhealth.com to find out more. Welcome back to the Good Health Podcast. I'm Nicole Good, certified functional medicine practitioner and founder of the Good Health Clinic. And this month, we're turning our attention to stress. Stress is one of those words that gets used constantly, yet rarely explained properly. It's often framed as something psychological, something that you need to manage better or think differently about, or simply something you need to tolerate as a part of our modern life. But stress isn't just in your head, it's a biological process that affects every single system in your body. And when stress becomes chronic, it doesn't just make life feel harder, it quietly rewires how the body functions. Today's episode is about understanding that process, not to alarm you and not to add another thing to your list, but to help you recognize stress as a physiological load rather than a personal failing. So why do we need to rethink stress? We talk about stress constantly, yet we rarely stop to question what we actually mean by it. Stress is usually framed as something psychological, something to manage better, to think about differently, to just accept. We're told that we need to be more resilient, more organized, more positive. And if we're still struggling, the unspoken message is that we're just not coping well enough. But stress isn't just a mindset, and it isn't a personality trait. Chronic stress is a physiological state. It's something that happens in the body, in the nervous system, in hormone signaling, in immune function, and in metabolism. And once you understand that, the conversation around stress changes completely. One of the reasons stress is so misunderstood is because so many people are coping. They're functioning, they're getting through their days, meeting responsibilities, caring for others, and often doing so very competently. But from the outside, and sometimes even from the inside, it looks like resilience. But coping doesn't mean that your body isn't under strain. It often means that the body is compensating. You can be organized, you can be capable, you can be outwardly calm, all while your nervous system remains in a state of chronic activation. You can feel mentally fine while your physiology is operating as though it's under constant threat. This is where the idea that stress is all in your head becomes not just inaccurate, but actively unhelpful. It leads people to dismiss the physical symptoms, to override early warning signs, and blame themselves when their body eventually starts to push back. Stress isn't just about what's happening in your life, it's about how your body is responding to it. Two people can experience very similar circumstances and have completely different stress responses. One person's system may move smoothly between effort and recovery. Another's may stay switched on long after that demand has passed. And that difference isn't about strength or weakness. It's about biology, history, and cumulative load. When stress becomes chronic, the body adapts. It changes how it produces energy, how it regulates inflammation, how it prioritizes repair. These changes don't happen because someone is failing. They happen because the body is trying to protect itself in an environment that feels persistently demanding. And I want to be very clear about something from the outset of this episode. This conversation is not about blaming yourself for being stressed, and it's not about telling you to cope better. This is about understanding stress properly as a biological process so that supporting it becomes more compassionate, more effective, and far less self-critical. Because once we stop treating stress as a personal shortcoming and start recognizing it as physiological load on the body, we open the door to real change. So, acute versus chronic stress, what can the body actually handle? To understand why stress becomes a problem for so many people, we need to separate two very different things: acute stress and chronic stress. Acute stress is not harmful. In fact, it's essential. It's the body's built-in response to challenge, the surge of energy that helps you react quickly, focus sharply, and get through something that is demanding. When acute stress is working as it should, it rises to meet a challenge and then it settles back down again. And that's the key, that it settles back down again quickly. The body activates, it responds, and then it returns to baseline. Recovery is built into the process. And this is what the human stress response evolved for. Short-term threats, clear beginnings with endings, a cycle of activation followed by a cycle of rest. Chronic stress is different. It's not about intensity, it's about duration. Chronic stress occurs when stress signaling stays switched on without resolution. There may not be a single dramatic event, but the body remains in a state of heightened alert because the system never fully receives the signal that it's safe to stand down. Modern life makes this far more common than we realise. Many of today's stressors don't have clear endpoints. Work pressure doesn't end when the task is finished. It carries over into the evenings and the weekends, or just straight into the next task. Emotional load lingers long after conversations are over. Digital stimulation keeps the nervous system engaged late into the night. Even factors we don't consciously label as stress, so things like poor sleep, blood sugar instability, inflammation, chronic pain, gut dysfunction, they all send stress signals to the body. The nervous system doesn't distinguish between psychological and physical stress. It responds to perceived threat and demand. Over time, the body adapts to this environment. Stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline become part of the background rather than the exception. The system learns to function in a state of activation. In the short term, this adaptation is helpful. It allows people to keep going, to cope and to perform. But the longer this state persists, the more regulation begins to shift. Recovery becomes less efficient. The nervous system loses flexibility. Instead of moving smoothly between activation and rest, it stays biased towards alertness. This is the difference between short-term activation and long-term dysregulation. In short-term activation, the body responds to demand and then recovers. In long-term dysregulation, the stress response becomes the default. The system doesn't fully switch off, even when the original stressor has passed. Importantly, this doesn't feel dramatic at first. People don't necessarily feel stressed in the way that you might expect. You may feel that you're still functional, still capable, even maybe productive, because stress chemistry is helping you to prop the system up. Clinically, this is where so many people get stuck. You don't realize that your stress response is over-engaging because it becomes familiar. The body has adapted so well that strain feels normal. The key framing here is that the body is designed for stress, but not constant stress. Without sufficient resolution, the recovery, the same systems that once supported performance, begin to undermine it. Energy becomes harder to access, sleep becomes lighter, inflammation rises, and resilience drops. And none of this happens because someone is failing to cope. It happens because the system is doing exactly what it's designed to do. It's adapting to its environment, even when that environment never really truly allows it to rest. So why do so many people say that they feel fine until, of course, they don't? It's a phrase that I hear all the time, both in clinic and in everyday conversation, and it usually goes something like this. I didn't realize how stressed I was until my body forced me to stop. And that one sentence explains so much about why chronic stress is missed for so long. Because the body doesn't usually break down first, it compensates. The body is remarkably intelligent. If life demands more, it finds a way to meet that demand. Not by magically creating more resources, but by reallocating what it already has. It borrows from recovery, it shifts priorities, it turns up stress signaling, all to keep you functioning. And in the short term, it works. This is why so many people feel fine for years. You're tired, but you cope. You're stressed, but you manage. You notice symptoms, but you normalise them. You're getting through the day, so you assume you must be okay. And people describe this in many different ways. So some will say, I'm tired, but that's just life. Or I'm tired, but I'm getting older. I'm a bit snappy, but I've got a lot on. My sleep isn't great, but whose is? Others will say things like, I just need a holiday, or I'll rest when things calm down, or I'm fine once I get going. How many of these have you said in your lifetime? And that last one is a big clue. I'm fine once I get going. Because stress hormones are very effective at getting you going. Cortisol and adrenaline can create a sense of drive, urgency, alertness, and focus. They can give you a second wind. They can help you to power through. The problem is that they also mask what the body is actually experiencing underneath. Stress chemistry doesn't always feel like stress. In high-functioning people especially, it can feel like productivity. It can feel like momentum. It can feel like I'm just busy.
Many people don't experience chronic stress as panic or as obvious anxiety. They experience it as being permanently switched on. You're always thinking, always planning, always anticipating what's next. Maybe you feel restless when you stop or guilty when you rest. You might struggle to switch off even when you're exhausted. Or you may experience it as a slow dulling of capacity. Maybe you've got less patience, less tolerance, more overwhelm, more irritability, a shorter fuse, a nervous system that reacts more strongly to smaller things. And because these shifts happen gradually, you adjust without realizing. The baseline moves. What used to feel unusual becomes normal. This is the slow shift from adaptation into depletion. In the adaptation phase, you can still perform. You still get results, you still show up. But it costs more than it used to. You recover more slowly, your sleep becomes lighter. You need more stimulation to feel alive, more caffeine, more urgency, more scrolling, more pressure. You might notice that you're more reactive emotionally, but you tell yourself it's just a busy season. You might notice your digestion is changing, bloating, reflux, altered appetite, but you put it down to food or hormones or age. You might notice that you're getting ill more often or that you never quite feel fully well, but you assume it's just bad luck or it's the time of year. You might notice you feel less like yourself, but you keep going anyway. High-functioning people are particularly good at this, not because they're in denial, but because they're capable. They've often built a life around competence. They know how to push through, how they're used to being relied on. They may have spent years overriding their body's signals because that's what was required to meet responsibilities. And over time, the body learns that it has to be the one to adapt because the environment isn't changing. The difficulty is that adaptation looks like coping until it doesn't. Depletion tends to arrive quietly. It can look like losing your usual resilience, needing longer to recover from normal demands, feeling drained by things that never used to drain you. And then often there's a tipping point. Sometimes it's a big event, illness, grief, a major life change. But quite often it's something relatively ordinary, a busy month, a poor night's sleep, a small virus, an emotional conversation. And suddenly you notice, I can't do what I used to do. People describe it as feeling fragile or like their nervous system is exposed, like they've lost their buffer, like they're functioning, but it's taking everything that they have. That's not sudden weakness, that's the cost of prolonged compensation. And this is where the key reframe matters so much. Feeling fine doesn't mean the system isn't under load. It often means the system has been working very hard just to keep you functioning. If you see yourself in this, I want you to hear this clearly. You haven't failed. Your body has been adapting the entire time. The signals you've experienced, the irritability, the sleep disruption, the gut changes, the lowered recovery, they're not random. They're early communication. And one of the most empowering things you can do is stop waiting for a breakdown to give you permission to take stress seriously. You don't have to collapse to justify support. You don't have to reach crisis point for your body to be telling you the truth. Understanding this is often the turning point because it replaces self-blame with clarity. And when we have clarity, we respond differently. So what are the early signs of maladaptive stress responses? One of the reasons chronic stress is so difficult to recognize is that it rarely shows up in one obvious way. Instead, it expresses itself quietly across multiple systems, long before anything looks like a crisis. People often expect stress to feel like anxiety or panic, but for many, especially those who are high functioning, the signs are far more subtle. They show up in how the body responds, recovers, and copes, not just in how the mind feels. One of the earliest signals is often irritability and emotional reactivity. People describe feeling less patient than they used to be. Small things will trigger a stronger response. There's a sense of being on edge, not anxious exactly, but wired, reactive, or easily overwhelmed. You might notice that your tolerance is lower. You snap more quickly. You feel emotionally stretched, even when nothing particularly dramatic is happening. What's important to understand here is that this isn't a character flaw, it's nervous system signaling. When the body is under sustained stress, the nervous system becomes more vigilant. It's primed to detect threat, which lowers the threshold for emotional response. The system isn't overreacting, it's responding to an environment that feels persistently demanding. Another early sign is poor recovery. People often notice this first after exercise. Workouts that used to feel energizing now leave them drained. Muscle soreness lasts longer. Motivation to move drops. Not because they're lazy, but because the body doesn't feel able to recover in the same way. Recovery from illness may also change. A mild virus may linger longer than expected. Maybe you don't bounce back quite as quickly. You might feel not quite right for weeks afterwards. And then there's recovery from life itself, busy weeks, social events, or emotionally demanding periods that leave a much deeper imprint. What once required a good night's sleep now takes days to recover from. This is a key signal of stress physiology. When the stress response remains elevated, recovery processes are downregulated. The body stays in a state of readiness, not rather than repair. Sleep disruption is another common early sign. So people often say, I'm exhausted, but I can't switch off. Thoughts keep going. The body feels tired, but the mind feels alert. Others will fall asleep quickly, but wake in the early hours, often with a sense of alertness or unease. And some of you maybe sleep through the night, but wake feeling unrefreshed, as though sleep hasn't done its job. This happens because stress signaling interferes with the natural rhythm of sleep. Cortisol, which should be low at night, may remain elevated. The nervous system stays partially activated, preventing deep restorative sleep stages. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. Poor sleep increases stress sensitivity, which further disrupts the sleep. And then we have the gut, another system that often shows stress early. People notice bloating that doesn't clearly relate to what they've eaten. Appetite changes, either reduced hunger or increased cravings. IBS-style symptoms that come and go without a clear pattern. This isn't coincidence. The gut is highly sensitive to nervous system signaling. Under stress, digestion is deprioritized. Motility changes. The gut barrier becomes more permeable and inflammation increases. When people try to fix this with restrictive diets alone, they're missing the key underlying driver, the stress physiology that is affecting the gut function. Another quiet signal is inflammation. People notice more aches and pains. Joints feel stiffer. Old injuries flare up. Skin conditions worsen. Minor illnesses occur more frequently. Stress alters immune regulation. When stress signaling remains high, inflammatory processes are upregulated. The immune system becomes more reactive, but not necessarily more effective. This is why people under chronic stress often feel like their body is slightly inflamed all the time. Not acutely unwell, but never fully well either. And what makes this particularly confusing is that these signs often show up together. Sleep, digestion, mood, recovery, immunity, all subtly shifting at the same time. People chase each symptom separately. So they try sleep aids, gut protocols, anti-inflammatory supplements, but because the underlying stress response hasn't been addressed, nothing fully resolves. This is the clinical insight that matters most. These are not separate issues. They're stress physiology showing up across your systems. The body doesn't compartmentalize stress, it distributes it. When stress becomes chronic, it changes how multiple systems communicate and prioritize. The symptoms are varied, but the signal is unified. And recognizing that is powerful because it means the body isn't malfunctioning randomly, it's responding coherently to sustained demand. If you see yourself in this, in the irritability, the poor recovery, the disturbed sleep, the gut changes, the inflammation, it doesn't mean you're falling apart. It means your system has been under load for longer than it was designed to carry alone. By this point, it's probably clear that chronic stress isn't just something that you experience, it's something your body adapts to. When stress becomes persistent, the body doesn't simply stay the same and feel worse, it changes how it functions. And this is what people mean when they talk about stress rewiring the body. Not in a dramatic or irreversible way, but through gradual shifts in how systems communicate and prioritize. One of the first changes happens in the nervous system. Under ongoing stress, the nervous system becomes biased towards threat. This doesn't mean that you're consciously anxious or fearful. It means the system is more vigilant, more reactive, and less able to settle fully into states of rest and repair. The body becomes better at detecting potential problems and less efficient at switching off when those problems aren't present. Over time, this reduces flexibility. Instead of moving easily between activation and rest, the system gets stuck closer to on. This nervous system bias then influences hormone signaling, particularly cortisol. Cortisol isn't a bad hormone. It plays a vital role in energy regulation, immune function, and circadian rhythm. Under healthy conditions, cortisol follows a predictable daily pattern. Higher in the morning to help you wake up and mobilize energy, and then gradually tapering off through the day so the body can rest at night. Chronic stress disrupts that rhythm. Cortisol may rise too early, may stay elevated too late, or spike unpredictably. Some people feel wired in the evening and exhausted in the morning. Others feel flat and unmotivated during the day, then alert when they should be winding down. This isn't failure of discipline or sleep hygiene, it's a stress-adapted rhythm. Stress signaling also affects the immune system. In the short term, stress prepares the immune system for potential injury or infection. But when stress becomes chronic, immune activity can remain partially switched on. This leads to low-grade inflammation, not enough to cause acute illness, but enough to drain energy and increase symptom sensitivity. Inflammation is metabolically expensive. It consumes resources. It alters how energy is produced and used at a cellular level. This is one of the reasons people under chronic stress often feel tired even when they're resting. Energy is being redirected towards defense rather than repair. Stress also affects metabolism. Stress hormones influence blood sugar regulation, insulin sensitivity, and how fuel is mobilized. Under chronic stress, the body prioritizes quick energy availability over long-term efficiency. This can lead to blood sugar volatility, cravings, crashes, and a sense that energy is unpredictable or fragile. Over time, this reduces metabolic flexibility, which is the body's ability to adapt slowly to different demands. All of these changes share a common theme. The body is becoming less flexible. Flexibility is what allows us to handle stress, to recover, and then return to baseline. Chronic stress narrows that range. The system becomes good at coping in one mode, usually high alert, and less able to shift into others. This is why people under chronic stress often say they feel stuck in tiredness, stuck in tension, stuck in reactivity. And this is where an important distinction matters. These changes are not damage, they're adaptation. The body is responding logically to an environment that feels persistently demanding or unsafe. It's prioritizing survival over optimization, protection over performance. And that matters because it explains why stress can't be resolved through mindset alone. You can't think your way out of an altered nervous system signaling. You can't will your cortisol rhythm back into balance. You can't override immune activation through positivity. What does help is creating conditions that allow the body to relearn safety, flexibility, and recovery. And that process begins with understanding, not self-criticism. When we see stress for what it is, a biological state rather than a personal flaw, we stop fighting the body and start working with it. We live in a culture that is quietly rewarding endurance. Being busy is normalised, pushing through is praised, coping becomes a badge of competence. But coping doesn't mean you're unaffected. And functioning doesn't mean that you're regulated. Many people carry significant stress loads while appearing outwardly capable. They meet responsibilities, they show up for others, they get things done, and because they're still functioning, they assume their body must be managing just fine. In reality, that stress is accumulating. It's building layer by layer through physical demands, emotional responsibility, disrupted sleep, illness, inflammation, and mental load. None of these in isolation are necessarily harmful, but together over time, they're creating a burden on the body that your body has to adapt to. When the stress load becomes heavy enough, the system changes how it functions in order to cope. Energy is redirected, recovery is deprioritized, flexibility narrows. And when symptoms appear, people often interpret them as personal shortcomings, telling themselves that they should be coping better, resting better, managing stress better. But symptoms aren't evidence of failure, they're evidence of load. Regulation is what restores capacity. When the nervous system is supported, when stress signaling settles, the body regains its ability to recover. Energy becomes more accessible, sleep improves, inflammation calms, resilience returns, not through force, but through safety. Supporting stress isn't about doing less because you're weak, it's about recognizing when the system needs conditions that allow it to repair. One of the reasons I wanted to spend this much time unpacking stress today is because it so often gets approached in the wrong order. Many people try to optimize their health while their system is still under strain. They focus on productivity, performance, or fixing individual symptoms without first addressing the underlying stress physiology that's driving so many of those issues. But the body doesn't respond well to optimization when it doesn't feel safe. And this is why we start very early on with stress regulation inside the Good Health Studio and clinic, not willpower. Regulation isn't about doing less for the sake of it. It's about helping the nervous system settle enough for recovery to actually take place. It's about restoring flexibility so the body can move between effort and rest without getting stuck. When stress signaling calms, everything becomes easier. Energy is more accessible, sleep becomes deeper, digestion improves, and inflammation settles. And importantly, this doesn't require forcing yourself to relax or changing your personality. It requires understanding how stress shows up in your body and supporting it in a way that makes sense for where you are at right now. That philosophy, regulation before optimization, underpins everything we do in the Good Health Studio and the Good Health Clinic. Not because people are not trying hard enough, but because trying harder isn't what stress physiology needs. If you've been listening today and you've started to recognize your own patterns of stress, not as weakness, but as load, then that awareness alone is valuable. Support doesn't start with doing more, it starts with understanding what your body has been responding to and giving it the conditions it needs to recover. As we bring this episode to a close, I'd invite you to pause for a moment and reflect on what you've heard. Not to analyze it, not to diagnose yourself, but simply to notice what resonated. Where did you recognize yourself? Where have you normalized stress in your life? What signals might your body already be giving you that you've learned to override or explain away? If there's one thing I hope you take away from today, it's this. Stress isn't something you just think or feel. It's something that your body is responding to. And those responses make sense in the context of what you've been carrying. Nothing you're experiencing means you're weak or failing. It means your system has been adapting. And adaptation, when understood, can be supported. In the next episode, we'll take this understanding a step further and look at how stress shows up in real life, the most common stress patterns that I see every week in clinic and how they differ from person to person. Because just like energy, stress doesn't look the same in everyone. And once you recognize your pattern, supporting it becomes far more effective and far more compassionate. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you've enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe or share, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Good Health Podcast.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Good Health Podcast. Do share the episode with anyone you think it may benefit, and help us to spread the word on all things health and wellness by rating, liking, or subscribing to the podcast. If you want more, you can listen to more episodes on your favourite podcast app, or sign up to my newsletter for my favourite tips, tricks, health advice, brands, recipes, and more at nicolegoodhealth.com/newsletter. Have a lovely week. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Good Health Podcast.